People think monsters live in forests, in alleyways, in shadows. They're wrong. Sometimes monsters live in houses with white fences, trimmed lawns, and they hide their secrets under the floorboards. My name is Rafe Quinn, 20 years in homicide, and this is the case that still keeps me awake at night. It began with a renovation. An old farmhouse outside Ravenwood, Michigan. A crew was tearing up warped floorboards when they hit steel. A trapdoor, bolted, welded, and sealed in concrete. Someone hadn't been trying to keep people out. Someone had been trying to keep something in. They ground through the bolts, lifted the hatch, and the house exhaled. Cold air spilled out. The kind of cold that has memory. A narrow staircase led down into darkness. At the bottom, a perfectly preserved 1970s girl's bedroom. Pink bed, neatly folded clothes. Dolls arranged in a line like obedient witnesses. Nothing touched for decades. Time had stopped here, deliberately. I ran my hand across the dresser. Dust everywhere, except one thing, a small jewelry box. I opened it. Inside were 6 human teeth, all children. I've seen crime scenes that felt angry, chaotic, desperate. This one didn't. This one felt patient, like it was waiting to be found. And I realized something then. This wasn't the story of a child who disappeared. This was the story of a child who was never allowed to exist. Crime scene techs filled the house, but I stayed in that room alone for a while. I always do that. Rooms talk. You just have to listen. The wallpaper was hand-cut, pressed carefully. The furniture wasn't thrown together. It was arranged with love. A bookshelf. A toy chest. A bed made with military precision. This wasn't a dungeon. This was a nursery built in the dark. And that was worse. I sat on the bed. The springs creaked, the sound of a child shifting in the night. A lamp still worked when I turned it. Meaning power had once been wired down here on purpose. Then I noticed something small near the baseboard. Tiny scratches. So I knelt down with my flashlight. They weren't random. They were letters carved by a trembling hand. Nora, a name. The first time you see a dead child's name carved into wood, it never leaves you. Nora didn't disappear into the world. Nora disappeared into a room beneath her own house. And someone made sure of it. I looked at the ceiling. A small vent, just big enough for air, or the sound of another world she never touched. Imagine growing up and believing air itself was a rumor. That was Nora's life. That was Nora's prison. And I promised her then, out loud in that room where nobody had been for decades, I will find what happened to you. Rooms talk, and this one had screamed for 40 years. The farmhouse belonged to the Harroway family, revered. Church, going, model citizens, according to the old records. The town called them good people, community helpers, blessed. They had 4 children listed on paper. Gregory, Sarah, Michael, and Nora. The youngest, except Nora was filed as a runaway at 9 years old. Case closed in 2 days. No search teams. No media attention. No Amber Alert, too early for the era anyway. Just a sentence on paper. Child, and that was when the case felt wrong in my bones. Because 9 year olds don't run away and leave behind. Every toy, every dress, their bed neatly made. They don't run down. They run away. And Nora didn't run anywhere. She was already exactly where she'd spent her whole life, beneath their feet while they ate dinner, laughed, prayed, slept, pretending she didn't exist. Sometimes evil doesn't wear fangs. Sometimes evil wears Sunday clothes and smiles for photographs. The toy chest was locked. I pried it open. A dollhouse sat inside. Not cute, not playful. Exact. An exact miniature replica of the Harroway farmhouse, down to paint chips, down to the barn, down to the trapdoor in the living room. And on the roof, carved carefully with a pocket knife, NHTLM AC Junior SBRQ 7 sets of initials. Zone was Nora Harroway. The others didn't exist in any Harroway records. That meant only two possibilities. Either the child who lived here imagined friends, or there were 7 children in that house who never officially lived. And one set of initials stopped me cold. RQ, my initials. Coincidence, probably. But I'd worked homicide long enough to know. Some cases choose you. I bagged the dollhouse and stepped back. And for the first time in years, I felt watched, not by the living, by the walls. We brought in cadaver dogs. If you ever want to know what real silence feels like, stand in a field while handlers drop leashes. And wait. The Harroway properties spanned 10 wooded acres. Old orchard, collapsed barn, tree well. The dogs moved in circles, and then one sat, then another, then the third, all in the same clearing beneath a dead apple tree. We dug 6 hours later. We hit wood, not coffins. Carpenter's chests, old, hand-built, unmarked. Inside the first, the small skeleton of a child wrapped in a floral bedsheet, hands folded carefully, no violence on display. No chaos, just ritual care after monstrous cruelty. As if guilt and love had been braided into the same rope, we recovered 3 bodies the first day. All children, all buried in a circle. And I knew the dollhouse wasn't decoration, it was a record. Not a game, not pretend. And somewhere out there was someone who carved those initials carefully into wood, because they couldn't scream out loud. Every old case has ghosts. This one had a heartbeat. 3 days after the news broke, my desk phone rang. Unknown number. Elderly voice, careful, scared. Detective Quinn, she's not dead. Silence. Who? I asked. The little one, the one with the carved name. Nora, she had a sister down there. My pulse shifted tempo. The caller's name was Mrs. Calloway, former nurse at a state facility 2 towns over. In 1993, they'd admitted a girl, approximately 12, malnourished, barely verbal, terrified of doors, terrified of sunlight, no records. No last name, just a first name, she whispered when they asked who she was. Elia. And for 30 years, everyone assumed Elia was a tragedy without history. Until we found the room, and the name carved into the floorboards. Nora, sister. Elia was transferred to long-term assisted care, and eventually faded off paperwork like thousands of forgotten people do. Except now, she suddenly mattered more than anyone alive. Because Elia wasn't just a witness. She was a survivor of that room. I drove 3 hours to meet her. The facility was quiet. Birds outside, antiseptic inside. Elia sat by a window, hair streaked with gray despite her youth, tracing circles on the glass like she was still learning what outside meant. I sat across from her slowly. "Hi, Elia," I said. She didn't look at me. She looked at the sky, and then she whispered, "Did you find the pink bed?" My chest tightened. "Yes," I said. "We found the room." Her hand trembled. "Did you find her?" "Who?" She finally turned and looked straight through me. "The girl who sang to me when it was dark." That was Nora. But Elia didn't say her name yet. Trauma keeps its own calendars. I laid a photo on the table, the dollhouse roof, initials carved. She reached out slowly, touched one, and then she touched another. They're 2 sisters, Nora Harroway, Elia Harroway. She didn't cry. Children raised in cages learn to grieve silently. Instead, she said, she told me that someday the house would listen. She said floors remember, And that was the moment I knew this case wasn't cold anymore. It was breathing again. I went back through archives. Every original report. One name kept repeating in thick black ink. Detective Marcus Vale, lead investigator. 1981. He'd closed Nora's runaway file in 48 hours. No interviews with neighbors. No warrant for the property. No school counselor checks. No follow-ups. He ruled it. No evidence of abduction. Likely juvenile flight. I've seen sloppy work before. This wasn't sloppy. This was intentional blindness. Marcus Vale was retired now, living in a lake cabin about an hour away. I drove out there. He opened the door already angry, like he'd spent 40 years arguing with ghosts. "I know why you're here," he said. "Then make it easy," I told him. "Why did you close that file?" He stared past me at the tree line and said nothing for a full minute. Then, "You don't understand this town, Quinn." Back then, the Harroways were untouchable. Money, church, favors. You pulled those threads. You didn't just lose your badge. You lost your life as you knew it. So you sacrificed a child. I said. He didn't deny it. He just said, "I told myself she ran away because it was easier to believe that than to imagine what really happened inside that house." Cowardice dressed as faith. The worst kind. As I left, he called out, "We weren't the only ones who knew." That sentence stayed with me. Not just one corrupt cop. A circle of silence. A town that chose comfort over truth. Crime scenes have layers. We'd found the room. We'd found graves. We'd found the survivor. But we hadn't yet heard the past. The second search of the farmhouse uncovered a false back panel inside the toy chest. Behind it 8 cassette tapes, hand-labeled in careful block letters. Years spanning 1981 to 1991. The first tape began with the faint hiss of recording. Then a soft girl's voice. "Nora, if somebody finds this, it means I didn't. My name is Nora. Today is my birthday. I think they say God can't hear underground, but I hope he can." My hand tightened on the recorder. She wasn't just imprisoned. She was creating a record. The only weapon she had. Tape 2. They brought another one. She won't stop crying. Her name is Elia. I told her the ceiling breeze if you listen long enough. Tape 3. You could hear singing. Not nursery songs, survival songs. Tape 5. A woman's voice finally appeared. Cold, controlled, not screaming, just certain. Obedience is love. Silence is obedience. The voice belonged to Sarah Harroway, the oldest. She wasn't just following orders. She was orchestrating. By tape 8, Nora's voice had thinned, starving, fading. "If I don't get out, let Elia see the sun. Tell her the sky was real. I saw it once." It was loud with birds. The recording ended in static. Somewhere between those tapes and the day Elia was found wandering woods, miles away, Nora had vanished completely. And one question drilled itself into my brain. Did Nora die in that room, or did someone move her to keep the secret intact? When you look at something long enough, it looks back. I went back into the room beneath the floor. However hard a place tries to hide its truth, the truth stains it. I pulled up the rug under Nora's bed. The boards underneath weren't original. Newer wood, different nails. We pried them up carefully. Underneath was packed earth and a narrow tunnel carved through soil, braced by stolen lumber scraps. Barely wide enough for a crawling child. Elia's voice echoed in my head. She told me to follow the wind. The tunnel ran toward the old orchard, straight toward the graves. But partway along, it split. One fork collapsed. The other kept going, toward the tree line where Ilya was eventually found in '93, filthy, shaking, but alive. Nora had built that tunnel over years, with fingers, with spoons, with stubborn hope, not to save herself. She must have known she wouldn't make it. You learn a lot about a person by the last thing they try to do. Most people try to live. Nora tried to save someone else. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a detective and started feeling like a witness, because this wasn't just crime. This was devotion carved through wood and earth by a child in the dark. And somewhere not far from where I stood was the answer to the single question that still mattered. Where is Nora now? Every family story has one character who rewrites the rules. In the Harroway family, that was Sarah, the oldest daughter, the one teachers called responsible, the one neighbors trusted with house keys and prayer chambers, the one who spoke at church louder than the rest. She was also the voice on Nora's tapes, the voice that said, obedience is love, silence is obedience. By the time we found her, Sarah went by Sarah Benton. Neat house, perfect lawn, carefully folded life. I knocked on her door. She opened it and smiled, a smile she had rehearsed her entire life. Detective Quinn, she said, I've been expecting you. Not fear, not shock. Expectation. We sat at her kitchen table. Lemon, dish soap, crosses on walls. I laid a photo down between us. The room beneath the floor. Her eyes didn't widen. Her hands didn't shake. She just said she was difficult. Who? Nora. She asked too many questions. You can't let that spread in a home. I've interviewed killers who raged, cried, begged. Sarah did none of that. She spoke like she was explaining household chores. Did you hurt her? I asked. She tilted her head slightly. Hurt, number, we corrected. We purified. There's a difference. That's when I understood. Sarah didn't think she was a monster. She thought she was a minister of order, and people who believe their cruelty is sacred are the most dangerous people in the world. Sarah refused to confess. She didn't need to. Her beliefs confessed for her. She talked for almost an hour. I barely spoke. I didn't need to. She said phrases like, children absorb sin. The youngest one was chosen to carry. Yet the house kept secrets because it was blessed to. And then she said something that made the room colder. Nora stopped needing food before the end. The Holy Spirit feeds the obedient. Starvation disguised as holiness. I asked one question. Where is Nora buried? She smiled, small and satisfied. She isn't. Silence swallowed the kitchen. What do you mean? I asked. She leaned forward, just a fraction. She never left the room. No hesitation. No metaphor. Just truth slid across the table like a coffee cup. She thought she'd said nothing. She'd said everything. We went back to the room at first light. Same stairs, same cold air. But now I knew what I was looking for. Not under the orchard. Not in the woods. Not in the barn. Beneath the room itself. We removed the bed frame. We removed the false boards. We dug beneath the dirt floor carefully. Centimeter by centimeter. I've dug for bodies before. This felt different. This felt like opening a letter addressed 40 years ago and never mailed, 2 feet down. A shovel hit wood, not a coffin. A chest, small, wrapped carefully in black plastic. We opened it in silence. Inside were a faded dress and necklace, and the remains of a child curled gently on her side. We found Nora Harroway exactly where she had always been. Under the room she had been imprisoned in. Under the place she had sang to her sister. Under the ceiling she believed breathed. She had never been missing, she had been hidden. By the time the medical examiner confirmed age and dental match, we already knew. The thing we'd felt since the first moment in that room now had a name. Nora, In evidence review, there was one tape we hadn't played fully yet. The last one. The recorder clicked and the room filled with sound. Nora's voice was weaker than before, but still steady. If you find this, then the house finally told the truth. A long breath. I made Elia a door. It's small, but the sky fits through it. She laughed softly. Starving children still find ways to laugh. Sarah says I'm fading because I won't repent. But I think it's because I gave my food to Elia. I don't mind. She dreams bigger than I ever did. She'll fit through the tunnel, better silence. Then, people think dying is loud. It isn't. It's like the house blinking. The mic rattled as she set it down. A lullaby hummed softly. The same one Elia still hummed by the window. Then she spoke one last sentence. Clear, strong, almost. Relieved. If she made it out, it means I was real. Static. The tape ended. I turned it off and just sat there. You don't get used to this job. You learn to carry it. And some names weigh more. Nora Harroway was 9 years old. She chose hunger so her sister could live. This wasn't a crime scene. This was a sacrifice. We told Elia, there is no training in the world for how to do that gently. She sat with a necklace in her palm, the one recovered with Nora's remains, and rubbed the worn metal like a worry stone. I told her, she whispered, I told her I'd find the sun. She stood up slowly, walked to the facility window, and for the first time since she'd been admitted as a child, she opened it herself. Just an inch, just enough for wind to touch her face. She said, the sky was loud with birds, she said. She was right. There's a kind of justice that doesn't happen in courtrooms. It happens in moments like that. In a survivor widening a window. In a dead girl finally being found. In a house that kept secrets finally being torn down piece by piece. We demolished the Harroway farmhouse that fall. The last thing to collapse was the trapdoor frame. And when it fell, the wind moved through the empty space where the room had been. And for a second, it sounded like singing. Justice systems move slowly. Grief doesn't. By the time Sarah Harroway Benton stood in court, winter had already settled in. The courthouse windows sweated from the heat of packed bodies. Reporters, neighbors, people who had prayed beside her for years and were now afraid to say they'd ever known her. She walked in calmly, like this was just another church service. The charges were read: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, child abuse, multiple counts of murder, conspiracy to conceal remains. She didn't flinch at any of it. The prosecution played the tapes. The room listened to Nora's small voice echo through speakers, meant for legal arguments. Not lullabies recorded underground. They listened to Sarah's own words, too. Obedience is love. Silence is obedience. It's rare you get audio proof of a belief that kills. The jury watched photos of the hidden room, the dollhouse, the teeth in the jewelry box. They saw the map of burials in the orchard. They saw the chest beneath the floor. I had testified earlier that day. I watched the jurors when I said, Nora didn't disappear. Nora was erased. Some jurors cried. Some looked at the table. Some stared at Sarah, like she was a stranger who had been living in their town the whole time. When the verdict came, it was simple. Guilty on all counts. Sarah didn't break, didn't beg, didn't apologize. She simply said, almost gently, you don't understand what we were doing. No, I thought. And we don't need to. Cases like this have villains. But they also have accomplices made of silence. After Sarah was sentenced, I kept working because questions still hung in the air like dust motes in that underground room. Who else knew? Who held close reports? Who let a 9-year-old go missing on paper and never ask where her toys were? The list wasn't short. A school counselor who said, "Some families are just private," a neighbor who heard screaming and turned the television up, a church deacon who suspected and prayed, instead of dialing a phone detective Marcus Bale, who closed a file because it was easier. None of them built the trapdoor. None of them dug the graves, but they built something too. They built the silence that let everything happen underneath it. I interviewed a neighbor who lived 2 doors down back then. She said, "We always thought something was off in that house, but we didn't want to seem unkind." Unkind. That's the word people choose when they don't want to say cowardly. There's a cost to speaking, but there's a much higher cost to not. You don't need to be the monster to help monsters thrive. You just need to keep the curtains closed. We thought the Harroway house was the end of the road. It wasn't. When we followed paper trails, donation logs, church financial transfers, we discovered something else. Nora's story wasn't isolated. There were other homes across counties and state lines where things didn't add up. Undocumented adoptions, foster kids, never enrolled in school, children sent to live with relatives who didn't exist, sudden vanishing, followed by swift case closures, and woven through many of those reports were the same signatures, the same churches, the same phrases in margins. Family is godly. Do not interfere. We don't know the full size of the network yet. We probably never will, because crimes like this don't always start with violence. They start when someone convinces themselves that they know better than the world what a child deserves. They start with belief twisted into control, with obedience demanded at the cost of childhood. This case will be studied for years, not because it is unique, but because it isn't. A month after sentencing, I went back to the property alone. The house was gone. Just open ground now, frost on the grass, the square dirt scar where the foundation had been. The orchard was quiet. Birds watched from black branches. I stood over the place where the room had once sat, and where the chest had been buried beneath it. For a long time, I didn't say anything. Then I said the only thing that mattered. "Your name is Nora. You were here. You were real." Because that was the one thing they had tried hardest to take from her. Her right to be a person who left footprints on the world. Wind moved across the empty space and rattled the dead apple branches overhead. And for a moment, just for a heartbeat, it felt like the house finally stopped whispering. Because there was nothing left to hold the whispers in. Some cases end when arrests are made. This one didn't. This one ends every time someone calls a welfare check, even when it feels awkward, listens to a child instead of explaining them away, refuses to treat privacy. Like a shield for suffering, Nora never saw the sky again after they locked her under that house. But she did something most adults never manage. She kept loving someone else while she was dying. She dug a tunnel with her hands. She carved initials into wood, so none of the others would vanish completely. She recorded her voice when it would have been easier to be silent. She made sure Elia escaped. And Elia did escape. She opens windows now. She stands in sunlight without apologizing. That's the closest thing to justice I know. I've worked homicide for 2 decades. I've seen what people do when they hate. What still haunts me is what people do when they think they're righteous. Monsters aren't born in darkness. They're born in certainty. So if you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Whenever someone tells you that suffering is holy, that obedience is love, that silence is safety, look under the floor. There might be a room there, and someone inside it might still be waiting to be found. My name is Rafe Quinn, and this case is closed. But its echo isn't not yet.